Imagine a biological anomaly so rare that it's statistically almost impossible. A creature born with a genetic code that demands absolute perfection. Now, imagine that this single animal is the only thing standing between the modern world and the construction of a third temple in the heart of Jerusalem. We are talking about a red cow, but not just any cow. We are talking about a specific, genetically perfect red heifer that has world leaders, intelligence agencies, and theologians holding their breath. In September 2022, a cargo plane touched down in Israel carrying a very unusual payload. On board were 5 red Angus calves, born and bred in Texas, flown halfway across the world under immense security. They weren't there for breeding. They weren't there for food. They were there to answer a 2,000-year-old question. For decades, the search for these animals has been a relentless pursuit by groups like the Temple Institute, a quest that often feels more like Indiana Jones than religious observance. But as of August 2025, the story took a sharp, dramatic turn. The Temple Institute confirmed what many feared. All 5 of those Texas candidates have been disqualified. The reason? Biology. A few white or black hairs sprouted where there should have been only red. Despite this failure, the machinery hasn't stopped. Practice ceremonies are currently taking place with the disqualified animals, essentially dress rehearsals for the end of the age. But why? Why does the geopolitical stability of the Middle East hinge on the color of a cow's hair? To understand this, we have to peel back the layers of history and go back to the very beginning. We have to look at the chok. In the ancient Hebrew texts, specifically the Book of Numbers chapter 19, there are laws that make sense. Don't kill, don't steal. And then there are laws called chok. These are divine decrees that defy all human logic. The law of the para aduma, the red heifer, is the ultimate illogical decree. The mandate is terrifyingly specific. The nation of Israel was commanded to find a heifer that is completely red. And when the text says red, it means absolute red. If you take a magnifying glass to the hide of this animal and find just 2 hairs that are black or white, the animal is useless. It is trash. But the checklist doesn't end at color. The animal must be without defect or blemish. No scars, no brands, no chipped hooves. It represents a state of physical perfection that nature rarely allows. And finally, it must never have been under a yoke. This is a crucial, symbolic detail. A yoke represents servitude to man. A yoke implies that the animal has been used for labor, for plowing, for the economy. This heifer cannot be part of the economy. It has to be wild, untouched, set apart from the moment of its birth, solely for this terrifying purpose. Once you find this impossible creature, the ritual that follows is violent and strange. Unlike almost every other sacrifice in the Bible, this one does not happen inside the temple. It happens outside the camp. It is an act of exile. The priest would lead the animal to a specific geographic coordinate on the Mount of Olives, a spot that looks directly over the walls and into the Holy of Holies. There, the animal is slaughtered. The priest takes the blood on his finger and sprinkles it 7 times toward the temple, creating a spiritual bridge between the death outside the camp and the holiness inside. Then the entire animal is incinerated, not just the fat or the choice cuts, everything. The hide, the flesh, the blood, and the offal are thrown into a massive pyre. Into this fire, the priest tosses 3 specific elements: cedar wood, which resists rot; hyssop, a scrubbing plant used for cleaning; and scarlet yarn, the color of blood. It all burns down to ash. And this is where the story gets incredibly complex. These ashes are collected and mixed with living water, water flowing from a natural spring. This mixture, this water of separation, is the only substance on earth, according to the Torah, capable of scrubbing away the impurity of death. In the ancient world, death was the ultimate contamination. If you touched a corpse or a bone or stood near a grave, you were spiritually radioactive. You were barred from the temple. You were cut off from God's house. The only way back was to be sprinkled with this water on the 3rd and 7th day. But here is the twist. that has puzzled philosophers for millennia. This ritual contains a paradox known as the paradox of purity. The ashes purify the person who has been contaminated by death. That makes sense. But the scripture explicitly states that the priest who performs the ritual, the man who burns the cow, and the man who gathers the ashes, they all become unclean. The very substance that cleans the dirty makes the clean dirty. It acts like spiritual radiation. To decontaminate the people, the priests have to absorb the contamination. It is a closed loop of sacrifice, where the remedy carries the toxicity of the disease. Historically, this event was incredibly rare. The Mishnah records that from the time of Moses until the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, a period of roughly 1,400 years, only 9 red heifers were ever sacrificed. 9. The first was prepared by Moses, the second by Ezra, and 7 more over the centuries. The ashes were so potent, so valuable, that a tiny pinch could last for generations. But when the Roman legions burned Jerusalem to the ground in 70 AD, the lineage stopped. The ashes were lost. The ritual died. And this brings us to the modern crisis. According to Orthodox Jewish law, we have all been living in a state of corpse impurity for 2,000 years. Without the ashes, no one is ritually clean enough to step foot on the Temple Mount to rebuild the sanctuary. The third temple cannot exist without the ashes of the 10th cow. This is why the 2022 airlift from Texas was so significant. And this is why the 2020 disqualification is such a massive blow. The great medieval philosopher Maimonides wrote a prophecy that haunts this search. He listed the 9 historical heifers, and then wrote, "The 10th red heifer will be accomplished by the king, the Messiah." He linked the appearance of this animal directly to the end of history. But it's not just a Jewish story. This has spilled over into evangelical Christianity. For millions of Christians, the red heifer is a flashing red light on the prophetic timeline. They look at this ritual, and they don't see a cow. They see a mirror of Jesus. The writer of Hebrews in the New Testament makes this explicit. Just as the heifer was without blemish, Christ was without sin. Just as the heifer was sacrificed outside the camp, Jesus was crucified outside the city gates of Jerusalem. And just as the ashes cleanse the outside of a person, Christians believe the sacrifice of Jesus cleanses the conscience from dead works. For these believers,